Welcome to Psyched for Psychology, a Nystrom & Associates podcast. Our hosts, Michelle Iverson and Brett Cushing, are both licensed marriage and family therapists at Nystrom & Associates. Each week, they talk about all things mental health and therapy, and you get a chance to dive into specific psychology topics that help promote personal development and wellness. And now, here are your hosts, Michelle and Brett.
Hello, and welcome again to another podcast episode. Me and Brett were thinking about wanting to talk about behavior change and why that is something that I think that's something that a lot of clients, when they initially come into therapy, sometimes that's their thing that they're looking for, right? They're coming in, they're feeling concerned about a behavior, something that they're doing. And they want help, they want assistance for that to change itself. And that's what they're kind of looking for.
And I think they come in with a sense of almost desperation sometimes. Mm-hmm. I've tried everything, right, and I still do this behavior. Mm-hmm. And no matter what the behavior, there's this understanding and there's this focus almost exclusively on the behavior itself and saying, mm-hmm, why can't I change? Mm-hmm. And so what we want to talk about today is really answering that question, why can't I change? And the simplistic way of putting it is we can't just focus on that, mm-hmm, behavior. And that's what we do because that's what's most prevalent to us in our mind. And we want to understand that the behavior does not happen in isolation.
Mm-hmm. So what do we mean by that behavior not happening in isolation? I think there's a lot of things to that. I think behaviors themselves, at least if you take it from a CBT approach, which is, more at least my strong suit that I like, behaviors come at the end of a chain reaction of events. And in CBT, the chain reaction goes, something happens to you. You are going to have a thought about what happened. That thought is going to influence how you're going to feel. And that feeling is what's going to influence the behavior that occurs next, right? The really common example I like to use, Brett, say you are walking down the street and this random stranger is walking right past you, but it kind of looks like they're looking at you and they have this mean mug scowl look on his face. So what's going to be your initial thought? It kind of depends. It depends on so many things. It depends on you. It depends on how your brain might potentially already be hardwired to kind of think and respond in a situation like that, which could be influenced by so many things, including your mood that day, including if you've ever had a bad interaction with a stranger on the street before. There's so many things that could influence that. But that first automatic thought that you have, it could be something like, oh, that guy looks like he's awful, right? It could be something more neutral. It could be, okay, seems like he might be having a bad day. Or it could be, oh no, I must have done something. I screwed up. I must have done something bad to cause him to feel that way. There's so many different types of thoughts that could happen, but we could see how each one is going to cause a very different emotional response and then a potentially very different behavior. And that behavior could be that more neutral one. Must be having a bad day. I'm going to move on with my day too, right? Nothing really happens. Or maybe potentially I move into doing a behavior that's not so helpful to me. Doesn't change the situation, right? I could end up kind of thinking if it was my fault, I must have done something wrong. I'm going to start beating myself about that, up over that all day long, thinking over and over again, what did I do? What did I do? Should I have walked differently down the road? Could I have somehow prevented this from happening? All day long. Not helpful.
No, and that's where I tend to go quickly. I will assume a position of guilt immediately. Something goes wrong. Someone's having a hard time. We talked in a previous podcast about we're always needing to be looking at our own stuff as therapists. Mm-hmm. This is the area I have to keep looking at is I will quickly think something's wrong with me. What did I do? And then that colors how I'm going to interact all day. It's going to affect my emotions and then my behaviors. And the way I like to describe this with clients is if you have like a helicopter, like a little remote control helicopter, and it's going right towards the window in my office, and it's like less than a foot away from hitting the window. How much power do you really have to stop it from hitting the window? And they say, well, like nothing. I can't do anything once it's here. Once it was maybe 20 feet away, there's a lot more power I have to keep it from hitting the window. Yeah. And the closer it gets to the window, the less power I have. However, when we come in for therapy, we're looking at this behavior, and all we're seeing is that one isolated behavior, when it's maybe less than a foot away from hitting the window, so to speak. And we just don't have a whole lot of power when that is all we're focusing on. But as you're saying, there is this chain reaction.
There's a chain we have to look at.
Yeah, that leads up to it.
That leads up to it. And so that's a big part of, we go into therapy thinking, okay, they're going to help me to, do this, very specific action just on this one behavior. And then sometimes clients get a little surprised where I'm like, wait, I think we have much larger context that we have to look into and start to really evaluate what even got you to that point in the first place.
So it's complex because, as you were really alluding to, there is a lot that goes into a behavior. Someone can give me a really mean look and I could be really upset and react to that because I had a terrible morning.
Yep.
Nothing went right. I didn't have a whole lot of sleep. I didn't even get to have breakfast. And now this person's doing that to me. And the same person could have the same kind of scowl on their face 2 months later. And I was just listening to a comedian on the way into work talking about something related to that. And I might find it hilarious.
Right. Yes.
So it's very complex.
Absolutely.
And very rewarding. Because it's even though it's complex, once we understand this chain, we become mindful of it, and now we can do something about it. Whereas if we're just focusing on the behavior in isolation, we're going to continually have lots of challenges and not see a whole lot of behavioral change.
Exactly. It's lightning fast. Like how your brain decides, because it's looking for fast solutions, because it's got to, evolutionary wise, like it's got to protect itself. So it's going to look for a lightning fast solution to a perceived threat, perceived problem. And so sometimes just over time, we start to develop a behavior, even if it's unhelpful behavior. Sometimes too, it's because it's trying to be a part of helping you to cope and to survive with something too. I think that's really important.
That is. So let's look at the elements of this chain. Where do you think it starts?
In terms of like if I were to create like a behavior chain with a client.
Right.
Yeah. So if anybody's ever heard of a behavior chain before, that's absolutely an exercise that you can do. And it's taking a look at if somebody's kind of really curious about it. And we use these a lot in working with eating disorders. So I want to talk about that for a little bit. Binging happens a lot for a lot of people at night. Often late at night before bed. And if somebody wants to seek treatment and help for it, they're like, well, they tend to come in like, hey, this binging, I want that to stop. And so we're thinking about a behavior, but one of my first things likes to be, we need to back up and we need to look at, say, even just that day. If you binged that night, what else was happening to you? Your thoughts and your feelings and maybe other types of behaviors that ended up proceeding and getting you all the way to the binge that ultimately occurred that night. And that tends to be a very, very common chain that we'll create with clients. I like that word chain too, because this is a very visual exercise. I like to kind of do links, like these big circles all linked together on a page. And we start with things like we woke up, say if you weren't feeling good about yourself and you didn't want to eat, you skipped breakfast that morning. Now you're feeling hungry, right? Now I had a bad day at work because my boss looked like they might be mad, but I didn't know if they were really actually mad. But I went ahead and assumed that, you know what, I think this is about me and I made a big mistake and they just don't want to tell me about it. And now I'm going to feel really bad about that. And then what am I going to do next to try and cope with that? We tend to see links in that chain as we're starting to talk together in session. We're starting to build out what that looks like. We can start to see how it makes sense that I got all the way to the end of the day. I was starving. I was feeling awful. And on top of that, I needed something to cope with.
Mm-hmm. Right? So what you're saying is 8 o'clock at night, that bag of chips
is going to look really good.
It's going to look really good. And that's because of what happened at 8 in the morning. Perhaps.
Exactly, perhaps. Or maybe the day before. We can start to look at how, on an average day, how things start to kind of build and progress. And that, again, there are so many factors, and this is so individual for each person, but so many factors that will go into that, including what's going on with your emotions. In this case, like even physical hunger, and how were you feeling physically throughout the day? And those thoughts and those emotions building to an event. And then we got to work through not feeling guilt or shame, because that's the next part of that chain. Right. Not feeling guilt or shame because it occurred. And sometimes by creating these chains, it kind of helps to kind of destigmify yourself. And like, it makes sense. I got to that point. I'm not going to make myself feel bad about that point either.
That is powerful, what you just said. It makes sense. And when we validate ourselves. And so often we don't lead our self-talk. We don't lead our own interaction with ourselves with validation. We're leading with change. And we're focusing on that 8 o'clock, just finished a bag of chips. Why did I do that? And then we're shooting on ourselves, and we're believing we're so guilty. Then we feel shame. And I think that's so powerful in what you said. When we understand the chain, we can say, oh, yeah, this makes sense. No wonder. It all makes sense because it's all happening together. It's not just this one event.
What I love about the behavior chain exercise is we will create this in session with clients. So we will get for them their individualized chain of how they got to the behavior that they want to stop. And I give them the opportunity to say, you have the power now to break those chains. So we start to identify where in that connection of chains could we say, here, I'm going to break it here. Instead of waking up, not feeling good about myself and not eating, I'm going to go ahead and eat. Right? Because that is going to help with me not getting too hungry later on in the day. And actually, that is going to be stuff that's going to help me build a better relationship with food. Instead of assuming that my boss is mad at me when I have no evidence that he is, and he's allowed to be mad and I don't need to be responsible for that either, I could break that chain there. Suddenly we're giving empowerment to our clients by being able to give them options and opportunities of, maybe I don't need to just see this chain repeat tomorrow. I could start to say, nope, I see it happening. I'm going to break it right here, right now.
Right. So yeah, I would say the first part of that again is it starts with the validation, because when we invalidate ourselves, that leads to a chain that is repetitive of going down and repeating. And so people in the substance use world would say that when we have this regret and we have the shame, that is a recipe to relapse. And so shame we have to be very careful of. And one of the ways we intervene is this validation and saying, hey, it makes sense. And then, I like what you're saying, then identification, like, okay, where can I stop this? And it's not going to be when I'm 1 foot from the wall, so to speak, or 8 at night. That's not the time to say at 8 o'clock at night. I'm almost past that point of no return to try to change that behavior. And so I can work on this when I'm so much more empowered 12 hours earlier, perhaps, and start to bring change.
Right. How do you like to work with this from more that DBT perspective?
Well, yeah, what we do in DBT with our behavior changes, we also talk about, we have the elements of, what are your thoughts? Because your thoughts lead to your emotions. Those emotions lead to your urges. Your urges relate to then your behaviors. But we also talk about trying to help clients understand their vulnerabilities. The way I like to describe it is our behavior is the result of a domino effect. And we see dominoes fall one right after another. And it's kind of fun to watch. And that's what happens. That last behavior is the result of a series of dominoes that have fallen. And it's, if you go backwards, it's the behaviors from the urge, then it's from it's the emotion, then it's from the thought. And yet there's if you think of dominoes on a card table, and I remember card tables because I always had to sit at them, at the little kid table for the holidays, and you'd see your Jello kind of jiggling because
it's all they're always wonky. They're stable.
Wonky. They're not stable, right? So imagine dominoes on a card table. The card table then is like our vulnerabilities, and so if I have a vulnerability, like I think of the acronym SHALT, SHALT. If I'm stressed, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Bored. We'll throw in B as a bonus. If I'm stressed, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, I'm vulnerable. And so that makes that card table kind of wonky and unstable. It's like the Snickers commercial. They say, like, you're not yourself when you're hungry. Here, have a Snickers. And everybody can relate to that because we know when we're hungry, we get hangry, right? So those are real vulnerabilities. And if we have a couple of those, 3 of them, like, I don't know, I'm borderline criminal if I have 3 of those happening. If I'm angry and I'm lonely and I'm tired and I'm hungry, look out.
Brett's not responsible for what comes next.
I don't even like me, right? But there's nothing I can do because I'm at my worst state. Now imagine if we have that going on, those vulnerabilities really make us susceptible to those negative thoughts and then the emotions, and it's just a predictable domino effect where when we understand it, like you're saying,
you sit back and you're like, oh, this makes sense.
It makes total sense.
And that's why we love DBT. Is DBT says there's that logic, reasonable side of your brain and your emotion side of your brain when you're in the moment and you're at the end of the chain. It's about, we tend to make a lot of decisions based out of that in that moment. And that's understandable. We all experience some form of that.
Right. Yeah. Right. And we, in DBT, we add like the vulnerability. We also look at what was the prompting event that was the first domino to fall.
Yes.
And it can be lots of things. A lot of times it can be associated with something from our past that's painful. And then we can just suddenly go 0 to 60.
Exactly.
And so we look at those vulnerabilities. We looked at the potential prompting event that sort of has an association maybe of something in our past. And it's fascinating because I've got a dry erase board. And it's fun to do this with my clients and just kind of map it out. And they go, oh, yeah, this makes sense.
Yeah. And that's the first kind of step towards understanding. I think we're so quick to judge in general, but we're so quick to judge ourselves and our behavior. And what we just talked about in the last episode that we ended on was building curiosity. How much do we work in therapy on removing that judgment and building curiosity about why is this behavior happening versus going straight to judging it?
And I hear you use that term curiosity and being curious a lot. I really like it because it's non-pejorative. It's positive, actually, I think, to be curious. And it's okay to be curious and just notice and go, oh, look, I'm doing it again, so to speak. So,
and I think that is going to be one of the biggest factors and influences towards actual change is when we're starting to also in therapy work on addressing negative judgments, working on addressing, like we said too, that guilt and that shame, if that's coming along with whatever the behavior is.
Right. And in DBT, we do a solution chain too. So we look at, all right, what can I do about those vulnerabilities?
Yeah.
I can get better sleep. I can get a better sleep cycle and circadian rhythm set. I can practice better eating habits. I can exercise, so those are things we can do to manage our vulnerabilities. What can I do for those thoughts and those emotions and those urges? What do I do to sort of mitigate that before I'm in this crisis at 8:00 at night, so to speak? And that's why I my heart's heavy for people that come in because they're earnestly wanting to change, and they earnestly say, I just can't.
Right. We get it now. I'm succumbing to this pattern, and it's so empowering to hear that actually you've got more power than you do realize. But absolutely, we also want to help you get the skills and the tools to help you to really be able to engage with that and to create that change that, like sometimes they're looking for us to make the change. It's like, no, actually, we're just giving you skills and tools so you can create that change for yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
It's so empowering. And because they do believe I think they're succumbing to the behavior without realizing the whole pattern.
Exactly.
And it's like anything. When you have greater context, things make sense. If I'm driving and I'm an enthusiastic driver, okay, so if someone's going 1 mile an hour under the speed limit, I am absolutely intolerant, right? And so I see that person. This happened once too when I was a pastor, and that person was going really slow on an on-ramp, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, and I'm really frustrated. So I'm going to pass the person. I'm going to give that person the look, and we know the look, right? Because I think we all do it when we're upset. Yeah. So I was going to give this person the look, and I pull up next to this person. I'm going to give him the look, and suddenly I had greater context.
Yes.
And it was the sweetest old lady in the church who was just a wonderful salt of the earth person. And I was going to give her the look.
Literally somebody you knew.
Literally somebody I knew. And I know she's going through a health crisis, and I'm like ready to give the look, and I'm like, oh my God. But what's cool is when I had a greater context and I realized, this is so-and-so, everything changed within me because I understood.
Yeah.
And so context is really what we're helping people have with these behaviors, because all we do is see the behavior rather than the greater context. So I like what you're saying. It's so empowering when we can help people see this, and then they can be more empowered and go from, I can only succumb to this. Now I've got other options when I see the greater context.
And then too, to really have so much patience with yourself too. That change is not quick. Even when we can see the pattern, even when we can know, okay, here's how I know how to help to break my chain, or really kind of take care of myself and work on those vulnerabilities, it still takes time. And I think one of the best things that I appreciate so much with my clients when they come in, even if they're like, okay, Michelle, it happened again this week, to say, that's okay. That is a part of this journey and recovery and changing these behaviors that we're working on in therapy. We expect that, and things will get better. And knowing that it's just being so patient, so kind with yourself all throughout this process.
Well, yeah, and think about it. If somebody comes in at 35 years old for therapy and they've had a behavior since they were, 5, 15, and they suddenly are aware of the greater pattern, they're like, oh, cool. And then they try to do things to interrupt that pattern, which is fabulous. And it doesn't happen. They're like really discouraged. But I like to say, well, you've been doing this for, let's say, 20 years. You've been practicing a new way of living for 2 days or 2 weeks. It's going to take a while.
That brings me back to our brain shortcuts. It loves those shortcuts, but it also likes to hang on to those shortcuts when they have been well established. It's about reminding yourself that you're rewiring your brain again, and it's creating a new shortcut, a better shortcut that's not going to result in that behavior you're looking to change, but it is going to take time. And that rewiring process, it's harder to do as we go older, but that never means that it is impossible to do. It's just allowing yourself more time and patience and sometimes kind of practice at breaking your chain.
Right. It reminds me, after we just received, 12 inches of snow, establishing a new path. If I'm going to walk my dog in the field, I'm going to go where the path is already worn down, because it's a lot of work.
It's easier. Right? It's easier if it's already worn down.
Yeah.
But then if it takes you where you're not planning on going, it's not going to work out for you.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So it really can work. And we have to believe that we just continue to do this. What I find, 2 things I wanted to maybe share is a typical, very typical pattern of behavior change that I see with so many of my clients, see it in myself. And that is when we think about our thoughts that lead to emotions, that lead to urges and behaviors. Yeah. And I've made this, they all start with SH. Okay. So it starts with the thought that I should, or I shouldn't. I should or I shouldn't. So when we have this and we should on ourselves, that leads to an emotion of shame.
Yeah.
And so when I think, well, I really shouldn't have done this, and I should have done this instead, and when am I going to get my act together? And I can't believe I keep doing this. Noticing the should that underlies all of that. And so we're putting this moral imperative upon ourselves that leads to this sense of shame. And what do we do when people experience shame? We want to hide. Mm-hmm. And that's just the natural human condition. When we feel shame, we feel exposed, and we don't want people to see, so we go and hide. Mm-hmm. And that leads to urges of what I say is shutting down and shutting other people out. And so when I do this, I try to show people on the board in my office, like, notice the should statements you're telling yourself. Notice that leads to shame. And that shame gives all this energy towards shutting down and shutting other people out. And in DBT, we have people with a lot of suicidal ideation. Yeah. And I tell them the ultimate shutting down and shutting people out would be suicide. And so, and it just sort of clicked, like you were saying, like, oh, well, this absolutely makes sense now. Mm-hmm. And that, again, just so validating. So I just wanted to throw that out because that is a very common behavior chain that I encounter. Well, not just with others, but I see it with myself as well.
Yeah, and I've actually, I've also worked with many clients on that topic. I've never thought about it that way. So I really appreciate the should and shame.
Should, shame, and shut down.
Shut down, shut out.
Got to be careful how fast you say that sometimes.
I know, right? Well, we hate that word should. And we keep going back to because it triggers all these negative things to occur.
Right.
Clients.
Yeah, I'd love to do a podcast just on the word should and shame. We should do that. We should. Wow. I just got should on. Well, it is fun.
The one acceptable time of that word.
Well, and it's funny because this is what I would love to talk about, because should and shame is very part of our behavior chains. And there is a place for shoulds, right? Yeah. Because there are things that are truly a moral issue. We need to be kind to people. We need to be understanding with people. And if we're mean to people, it's appropriate to have a should. I should not have done that. And we always say in our field that shame is like this bad emotion. And shame actually is a very helpful emotion. When I've done something that has been hurtful, the shame gives me the impetus, the urge to hide, but also can give me the energy to go forward and say, I really...
But even still to do something, not to just hold on to it forever.
Yes. Right. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. So that would be a fun episode for us. The other thing I just want to touch on is what still happens. Like, we can understand all of this and then we get resistant and we just don't want to change anyway. And so people can maybe go through their own behavior chain and then realize, okay, this is what's going on. Here's what I need to do. And I'm not going to do it. And we call that resistance. Yeah. So is there any kind of tricks you pull out to deal with resistance? Because I'll share what I do. And any thoughts?
Well, I think it's, it's really interesting, that word resistance. I think resistance still, it's there for a purpose and a reason. It reminds me, did I ever share the log story on the podcast? I don't think I ever have.
I don't think so.
So it's it comes more from my eating disorder background, but I actually can apply it to many other things and other kind of situations and what clients seek treatment for. So more broadly, and this comes from a wonderful book called Eating in the Light of the Moon. And it's a story about how if you are in the middle of a river and you feel like you are drowning and a log comes along right next to you, what else are you going to do? You're going to grab onto that log because you need it to survive. You hold on to that log for as long as you need to. But even when you get to calm waters and it feels like I could let go of this log, I could decide I'm not going to use or need this behavior, whatever it is, anymore, I still might not let go. My friends, my family could be on the side of the river, seeing me, shouting at me, "What are you doing? Just let go of the log, swim to shore." But I'm still scared of drowning. And so sometimes when we're in that stage of, I know I need to let go of this thing, whatever it is, and it's not serving me a good purpose anymore, but it got me through hard times. I like to say sometimes we can acknowledge that, right? even thank it. You got me through what I needed it to get through. And if I'm now ready to start to let go, I don't have to go all the way to shore. Sometimes therapy is about, I can slowly let go of it. Little doggy paddle right next to the log. Take a lap or two around the log. I can rebuild that strength. And the way we rebuild that strength is helping to find skills and tools that will help you to get your need met. Because ultimately, I think that's what's behind resistance. I'm not going to let go because I have a need that needs to be met. And in therapy, we need to give you those skills and those tools and figure out what they are that you need. So then you can swim to shore.
I really like that.
Yeah, it's a story.
I'm going to use that as well because it really highlights these maladaptive behaviors we're trying to change now. They do have a purpose, and sometimes the purpose was this was the survival skill I learned in my family of origin growing up, and it was effective then. It's not effective anymore, and so I would just like to throw out what I ask clients when they're encountering this resistance to change too, and that is kind of what you're saying is what's the threat of change, or what's the benefit of not changing? What's the benefit of holding on to that log? And resistance, we want change, and yet I wanted to add this because resistance is a part of change. There is going to be a point of resistance. And I thought your story really highlighted very well and validate why we resist. It absolutely makes sense. And there's some benefit to it. And there's some threat to letting go of that.
It's okay if other people don't see or don't get that, right?
Right.
And I think as therapists, it's kind of our duty to help to see that and to understand and kind of be there with you as you're trying to let go of that log.
Well, we enjoy the opportunity to be with you all again today, and hope that you're able to understand your own behaviors in a greater context of a pattern that leads up to it. And just being, if nothing else, being able to validate that and have some hope and sense of empowerment that you can let go of the log, so to speak, and realize that, there's a new future for you. So thanks for joining us. We look forward to speaking with you again real soon.
Thank you as always for listening, and please be sure to leave us a review. While this podcast can't be a replacement for therapy, we hope you enjoyed our discussion today and join us again next time. Nystrom & Associates is always available to those who are struggling. If you find yourself in need of support and help, please check us out at nystromcounseling.com.